not you. Well, for 490 years, Israel didn't do it. So God says, now I'll take all 70 years at one time. Daniel came to understand that. As he reflects on these matters and Israel's future, and he prays down in verse 20, he's speaking, he's confessing his sins, he's praying for Israel. Verse 21, while I was still speaking in prayer, then the man Gabriel appeared to Daniel. Gabriel comes to unfold for Daniel's benefit something of Israel's future. Evidently in his prayer, Daniel was concerned. Now there's a 70-year captivity for Israel. What about Israel's future? So Gabriel tells Daniel, verse 24, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. Now that 70 weeks is literally 77s. And it is 77-year periods. That will become clear in our future studies of Revelation, so we won't go into it now. Both in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, it's made clear we're talking about periods of years here, not days. So 77-year periods, 490 years, are determined upon your people. Now you note who this 490-year period pertains to. Your people, your holy city. So it is for your people, Daniel, the Jews, your holy city, Jerusalem, to finish the transgression. And there are 6 things here that will be accomplished in this 490-year period. Number 1, finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy place. In effect, if you will, those 70 weeks, 490 years, will serve to complete God's program in redeeming Israel and preparing the way for the kingdom. So that by the time you get through that period of time, Israel will have experienced the redemption that God has promised. So you are to know and discern, verse 25, from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So there's the beginning of the 490-year period. The decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. You can find this out, Nehemiah chapter 2. You can find out the date, I believe, in the Encyclopedia Britannica. That it was in 445 B.C. that the decree was given. That marks the beginning of the time. So, from that decree until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 7 weeks and 62 weeks, or a total of 69 weeks. And there is no clear reason why it's broken down into 7 weeks plus 69 weeks. We're not sure why the first 7 weeks was viewed as a block of time, the first 49 years. But at any rate, what we're concerned about is from the giving of that decree until Messiah the Prince will be 69 weeks or 483 years. Verse 26. Then after the 62 weeks, which was after the 7 weeks, 7 weeks plus 62 weeks, then after those 62 weeks, a total of 69, Messiah will be cut off. You can read one of the booklets from the bookstore on the 70 weeks of Daniel and lay out there the chronology, the most popular chronology that's been set out, climaxed the first 69 weeks on Palm Sunday, when Jesus Christ entered triumphantly into Jerusalem. A few days after that, Jesus Christ was cut off. He was crucified. Now you note here, it did not say that in the 70th week Messiah will be cut off, but after the 69th week. Consistent with many prophecies in the Old Testament, they are put right together even though there may be a gap of time in between. But here there is an indication of the gap of time, because after the 69 weeks, rather than in the 70th week, the Messiah will be executed. An indication there will be a break. The people of the Prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Talking about the Romans. Because our attention is being carried now to the Antichrist, the ultimate prince who will come. His people, the Romans. Because we'll be dealing with a revived Roman Empire when we get to the 70th week. Will destroy the city and so on. Now note verse 27. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. That marks the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel. The rapture of the church does not necessarily mark the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel, unless God sees fit to rapture the church at the moment that peace treaty is being signed. That could happen. But the scriptural indication is it's the signing of this agreement that will mark the beginning of the tribulation. My understanding is that the rapture of the church, if it does not occur simultaneously, will have occurred sometime before that event. I'll give some reasons in a moment. How much before? I don't know. A day, a week, a month? I don't know. I believe we can note clearly, Scripture says that the church will be removed before this 70th week. The 70th week will begin by the signing of that agreement. Incidentally, that's why we observe with such interest the peace process in the Middle East. The involvement of the European community in that peace process, because that is the people of the prince who is to come. Those are the people who comprise the old Roman Empire. And ultimately it will be a representative of those people who will enter in an agreement with Israel. Interesting, the change in Israel's government to a government that was voted in on the basis that they would be more likely to bring about the peace in that area of the world. So all these events are thrilling. I'm not saying they're the fulfillment, but they do set before us how things may rapidly be moving toward this event. I'm not saying there can't be other peace agreements signed, but when the peace agreement signed that Daniel 9:27 is talked about, the clock will have begun to run on the 70th week of Daniel. And we will be in what the Bible calls the tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble, time of wrath. This 70th week, this 7-year period, remember it's a week of years, not a week of days, is divided into 2 3.5-year segments. Because verse 27 says, in the middle of the week, He will put a stop to sacrificing, grain offering, and so on. So He's entered into an agreement with Israel that has freed Israel up to rebuild their temple if it's not already done, reinstitute sacrifices, and so on. In the middle of that 7-year period, He breaks the agreement. I'll get into the details of this in the future. This is the period of time that we are talking about. While you're here, let me express to you one clear reason why I believe the church will be raptured before the 70th week of Daniel. That's what we've already noted. Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. After 69 weeks, Messiah will be cut off. The church does not begin until after Messiah is cut off. It begins in Acts chapter 2. After the death, resurrection, and ascension of Christ. The church had no part in the first 69 weeks. The church did not begin until the 69 weeks were completed. Now, the 70th week has to do with Israel. This is to complete God's purposes with His people, Israel. He did not begin His purposes with a new people until He had set aside Israel. So it doesn't prove a pre-tribulation rapture, but it points to the fact that that's consistent with the way God has operated with these first 69 weeks. That He removed the church before the 70th week, then He again focuses attention on the Jews and Jerusalem to complete His program with them. The church is not part of that program in a direct way, as Daniel has been made aware of here by Gabriel. Now, this 70th week of Daniel is a time of wrath. Turn over to the book of Revelation. And let me just say, for those of you who study this in a little more in depth, I am simply going to be presenting my conclusion. This is what I did with my study leave in Colorado for 2 weeks. Studied post-tribulationalism and pre-tribulationalism. I'm just going to give you what I believe is taught here and won't attempt to answer point by point or give you the alternative explanations and why I think they're wrong, because I think that might get a little involved. Maybe at a later time I'll put together a study oriented to that.